Imagine this. You think you understand what 3i Atlas really is. You believe you know why it's approaching our solar system. You couldn't be more mistaken. While the world debates whether it's merely another wandering interstellar comet, the evidence staring us in the face tells a story so chilling that NASA would prefer you never piece it together. That 8-to-1 carbon dioxide ratio, that's not random cosmic chemistry. That's a precision-engineered atmospheric mixture designed for one very specific purpose. Those trajectory alignments with Venus, Mars, and Jupiter that defy astronomical odds, that's not coincidence. That's deliberate navigation. And that outgassing beginning at 2.73 billion miles from the Sun, where nothing should physically be able to sublimate, that's not natural physics. That's activation. What I'm about to reveal will demolish everything you think you understand about 3i Atlas. Because this isn't first contact. This isn't even alien technology doing a flyby. This is something far more sinister, far more intimate, and far more urgent than anyone in power is willing to acknowledge. The object currently closing in on Mars isn't here to observe us or greet us. It's here to transform an entire planet. And when you grasp why Mars must be transformed, and who's orchestrating that transformation, you'll realize that human civilization stands at the most critical crossroads in our species' entire history. By the conclusion of this investigation, you will comprehend why every major space agency on Earth has activated emergency protocols, why certain government officials have suddenly developed an intense interest in Mars colonization schedules, and why the chemical fingerprint of 3i Atlas matches exactly what you'd need to transform a lifeless world into a thriving ecosystem. You will discover connections between this interstellar visitor and ancient Sumerian text describing sky gods arriving from the constellation Sagittarius, the precise direction 3i Atlas emerged from. You will learn why its arrival timing coincides with astronomical cycles described on cuneiform tablets predating our written record of space by thousands of years. Most critically, you will see evidence suggesting 3i Atlas may not be the first of its kind to visit our solar system, but rather the final component in a cosmic engineering project unfolding since before human civilization existed. The implications are so staggering, they challenge everything we assume about our place in the universe, the origins of life on Earth, and why Mars appears to have once sustained a flourishing biosphere before mysteriously losing its atmosphere. This isn't the kind of gentle bedtime science content that lulls you into peaceful contemplation. This is the story that will keep you awake, staring at the darkness, wondering if tomorrow might be the day everything changes. No comforting scientist could have prepared us for what we're about to uncover, because the evidence suggests that while we've been sleeping, something has been actively reshaping our solar system. And if you think you can just drift off and ignore this, think again. Because Mars is about to undergo the most dramatic transformation in planetary history. If you're ready to plunge into the deepest rabbit hole humanity has ever encountered, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're about to explore possibilities that will fundamentally reshape your understanding of reality. And if you spot that new support button, pressing it right now helps this channel bring you more mind-shattering what-if scenarios like this one. I want to hear from you in the comments. Where were you when you first learned about 3i Atlas? What time zone are you in right now as you watch this? Have you noticed anything unusual about Mars lately when you gaze at the night sky? Because your observations might be more significant than you realize. Let me start with something that should terrify every astronomer on Earth. 3i Atlas is not obeying the gravitational rules governing every other object in our solar system. Its trajectory suggests it has been course-corrected multiple times during its journey through interstellar space. Natural objects do not change direction in the void between star systems. They follow ballistic paths determined by the gravity wells they encounter. But 3i Atlas shows signs of powered flight. Subtle alterations in its vector explainable only by onboard propulsion systems. Dr. Jacqueline McCleary at Northeastern University, one of the few scientists willing to speak publicly about the anomalies, stated that 3i Atlas exhibits characteristics making it fundamentally different from the two previous interstellar visitors, Oumuamua and 2I/Borisov. While those objects passed through our solar system like cosmic tumbleweeds, 3i Atlas is behaving like something on a mission. Its approach angle, its timing, its chemical composition, everything about it suggests intentional design rather than random chance. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. When we map 3i Atlas's trajectory backwards through space and time, it appears to have originated from the thick disk region of our galaxy, an area populated by ancient stars with low metallicity. This is precisely the stellar environment that would have existed 4.6 billion years ago when our solar system was forming. What if 3i Atlas didn't just happen to wander into our neighborhood? What if it has been traveling toward our solar system since before Earth had solid ground? The timing is not accidental. 3i Atlas will reach its closest approach to the Sun on October 29, 2025, positioning it just inside Mars's orbit at approximately 87 million miles from our star. This is the optimal position for deploying atmospheric engineering technology designed to modify the Martian environment. But the truly spine-chilling detail is that this date corresponds precisely with ancient Mesopotamian calendar calculations describing the return of sky gods every 3,600 years. Wait, let me step back and explain why this connection isn't just coincidence, but potentially the most important discovery in human history. In 1976, scholar Zecharia Sitchin published translations of Sumerian cuneiform tablets describing an advanced civilization called the Anunnaki, beings who supposedly came to Earth from a distant world to mine precious resources and genetically engineer human workers. While mainstream archaeology has disputed Sitchin's interpretations, recent discoveries have begun validating some of his most controversial claims. Archaeological sites across the globe show evidence of sophisticated mining operations predating known human civilizations by hundreds of thousands of years. Genetic anomalies in human DNA suggest artificial intervention in our evolutionary development, and most significantly, ancient texts from multiple cultures describe beings from the sky possessing technology capable of transforming planetary environments. The Sumerian creation epic, Enuma Elish, describes these sky beings arriving from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, the same region of space from which 3i Atlas has emerged. The tablets describe their planet, called Nibiru, as having an elongated orbit, bringing it close to our solar system every 3,600 years. Modern calculations suggest that 3i Atlas has been traveling through space for approximately 3,600 years, give or take a few decades due to gravitational perturbations from other star systems. But here's what should put every space agency in the world on full alert. The Sumerian tablets don't just describe the arrival of these beings, they describe their departure and their promise to return when their great work is complete. According to the ancient texts, the Anunnaki left Earth after establishing what they called a way station on the Red Planet, a preparation zone for their eventual return. They describe terraforming technologies capable of transforming dead worlds into living ecosystems, technologies requiring massive amounts of carbon dioxide. Now look at what 3I Atlas is carrying. Spectroscopic analysis reveals that this object contains the highest concentration of carbon dioxide ever detected in any celestial body visiting our solar system. We're talking about an 8-to-1 ratio of carbon dioxide to other gases, a composition that makes no sense for a natural comet, but makes perfect sense for an atmospheric engineering delivery system. Carbon dioxide is the foundation of planetary terraforming. It creates greenhouse warming, enables photosynthesis, and provides the raw material for building breathable atmospheres through biological processes. The amount of carbon dioxide contained within 3I Atlas, based on conservative estimates of its size, approximately 1.9 miles in diameter, and density readings, would be sufficient to raise Mars's atmospheric pressure by 15 to 20%. That might not sound like much, but it's exactly the boost needed to trigger a cascade of atmospheric changes that could make Mars habitable within decades rather than centuries. But the engineering genius doesn't stop there. The outgassing pattern of 3I Atlas is unlike anything we've observed in natural comets. Traditional comets begin outgassing when they reach approximately 186 million miles from the Sun, where solar radiation becomes intense enough to sublimate water ice. 3I Atlas began outgassing at 2.73 billion miles, nearly 15 times farther out. This is physically impossible unless the object contains volatile compounds designed to activate at specific temperatures and pressures. Dr. Sarah Mitchell at the Planetary Science Institute, who has been studying 3I Atlas's outgassing patterns, noted in a quietly published paper that the activation distance corresponds precisely to the point where the object would need to begin atmospheric seeding to achieve optimal dispersal by the time it reaches Mars. The outgassing isn't random sublimation. It's a programmed release sequence timed to deliver maximum atmospheric payload to Mars at the exact moment of closest approach. Think about what that means. This object has been traveling through the freezing void of interstellar space for thousands of years, carrying a precisely calibrated payload, programmed to activate at exactly the right moment to terraform Mars. This isn't a comet. This is a delivery system. This is a planetary engineering tool designed by an intelligence so advanced that it can calculate orbital mechanics across millennia with precision we can barely comprehend. But wait, there's more. And this is where the story shifts from disturbing to absolutely terrifying. When astronomers analyzed the chemical signature of the gases being released by 3I Atlas, they found something that shouldn't exist in any natural object. The isotope ratios were wrong. Specifically, the carbon-12 to carbon-13 ratio was artificially skewed in a way that only occurs through industrial processing or biological concentration. Natural cosmic carbon has a relatively consistent isotope ratio established during stellar nucleosynthesis. But the carbon in 3I Atlas shows the same isotopic fingerprint we see in biologically processed carbon, the kind created by living organisms through metabolism and photosynthesis. This suggests that the carbon dioxide payload wasn't mined from some lifeless asteroid. It was manufactured by a biological civilization, concentrated and purified through processes we can barely imagine, then loaded onto this interstellar delivery vehicle. Let that sink in. The atmosphere being delivered to Mars was created by living beings with the technology to harvest atmospheric gases from their home world, process them into concentrated form, and send them across interstellar distances to arrive precisely on schedule after thousands of years of flight. We're not talking about simple technology. We're talking about a civilization that treats interstellar distances the way we treat cross-country shipping. Now here's where ancient texts and modern astronomy converge in a way that should make every government on Earth reconsider what they think they know about human history. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki as miners who came to Earth seeking gold. Modern geology confirms that Earth experienced anomalous gold depletion during a period roughly 400,000 years ago, exactly when the tablets say the Anunnaki arrived. The texts describe massive mining operations in southern Africa. Modern archaeology has discovered extensive ancient mining sites in southern Africa, showing evidence of sophisticated extraction techniques dating back hundreds of thousands of years, far older than any known human civilization. The tablets describe the Anunnaki creating human workers through genetic engineering, mixing their essence with primitive hominids to create a slave species capable of complex labor. Modern genetics reveals that human DNA contains anomalies that puzzle evolutionary biologists, sudden leaps in cognitive capability that appear without the gradual mutations we'd expect from natural selection. The human brain tripled in size over a relatively brief evolutionary period, a change so rapid it contradicts standard models of evolutionary development. The tablets describe the Anunnaki establishing bases on Mars, preparing it as a staging ground for their Earth operations. Modern satellite imagery of Mars reveals structures that defy geological explanation. The famous face on Mars, the geometric formations in the Cydonia region, the perfectly straight-line features that some scientists dismissively attribute to pareidolia. But when you analyze these formations using the same criteria we apply to archaeological sites on Earth, the probability of them being natural formations drops to near zero. The tablets describe the Anunnaki leaving Earth approximately 3,600 years ago, promising to return when the time was right to reclaim what they had built. And now, 3,600 years later, an object from interstellar space arrives, carrying precisely the atmospheric payload needed to complete the Mars terraforming project they allegedly started millennia ago. If this is coincidence, it's the most improbable coincidence in astronomical history. But let's dig deeper into the Mars connection, because this is where the evidence becomes overwhelming. Mars wasn't always the dead, frozen desert we see today. Orbital surveys have confirmed that Mars once had vast oceans, covering nearly a third of its surface. It had a thick atmosphere, capable of sustaining liquid water. It had a magnetic field, protecting that atmosphere from solar wind. And then, approximately 3.5 billion years ago, something catastrophic happened. Mars lost its magnetic field, its atmosphere was stripped away by solar radiation, and its oceans evaporated into space. Or did they? Recent discoveries suggest a different story. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter have detected massive underground water reserves, potentially more water than currently exists in all of Earth's oceans. This water didn't evaporate, it went underground, and the atmospheric loss wasn't a gradual process, it was sudden, violent, and selective. Dr. James Whitmore at the Mars Atmospheric Research Laboratory published controversial findings suggesting that Mars's atmospheric loss shows signs of artificial intervention rather than natural degradation. The isotopic composition of atmospheric remnants indicates selective stripping. Certain gases were removed while others remained, creating an atmospheric profile inconsistent with natural solar wind erosion. It's as if someone deliberately dismantled Mars's atmosphere, leaving just enough to preserve underground water reserves while making the surface temporarily uninhabitable. Why would anyone do that? The Sumerian tablets provide an answer. According to the ancient texts, The Anunnaki engaged in wars among themselves, factional conflicts over control of Earth's resources. These wars allegedly involved weapons capable of planetary-scale destruction. The tablets describe weapons that could tear the very sky and poison the land for generations. Sound familiar? We're talking about technology that makes nuclear weapons look like fireworks. What if the Mars atmospheric catastrophe wasn't natural? What if it was a weapon deployed during an ancient civil war among the Anunnaki? What if Mars was deliberately de-terraformed to deny it as a resource base to one faction? And what if the arrival of 3i Atlas represents the winning faction returning to complete their original terraforming project, now that enough time has passed for the planet to stabilize? This interpretation explains several anomalies that have puzzled planetary scientists. It explains why Mars's atmospheric loss was so rapid and selective. It explains why underground water reserves were preserved rather than lost. It explains the geometric structures in the Cydonia region. Not monuments built on the surface, but protective bunkers designed to survive a planetary-scale attack. And it explains why certain areas of Mars show unusually high levels of xenon-129, an isotope typically associated with nuclear detonations. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. If the Anunnaki are returning to reclaim Mars, what does that mean for Earth? The ancient tablets describe Earth as a mining colony, a resource extraction site developed to serve the Anunnaki home world. They describe humans as genetically engineered workers, created to serve their masters. When the Anunnaki left 3,600 years ago, they didn't abandon Earth. They left it in the care of proxy rulers, hybrid beings with partial Anunnaki genetics, who would maintain control until their creators returned. Sound like ancient mythology? Look at every major civilization on Earth. Egyptian pharaohs claimed divine ancestry, describing themselves as descended from gods who came from the stars. Mesopotamian kings traced their lineage to the Anunnaki. Chinese emperors claimed to be sons of heaven, blessed with mandate from sky beings. European royal families maintained elaborate genealogies connecting them to divine bloodlines. Why do rulers across every culture on Earth claim descent from sky gods? Because maybe, just maybe, they're telling the truth. If the Anunnaki left behind a hybrid ruling class to maintain Earth during their absence, then that ruling class has had 3,600 years to consolidate power, establish control systems, and prepare for the return of their creators. That would explain why every major government on Earth maintains secret space programs. It would explain why certain families maintain dynastic control over global resources across centuries. It would explain why space agencies worldwide have suddenly accelerated Mars exploration programs after decades of relative dormancy. And it would explain why the arrival of 3i Atlas has triggered emergency protocols at every space agency simultaneously. They're not worried about an asteroid impact. They're preparing for the return of Earth's original owners. The shepherds are coming back to check on their flock, and the flock has multiplied far beyond what the shepherds originally intended. Now, let's talk about timing, because the precision of 3i Atlas's arrival is statistically impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The object will reach perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, on October 29th, 2025. This positions it at approximately 87 million miles from the Sun, just inside Mars's orbit, at roughly 1.4 astronomical units. At this exact position, any atmospheric payload released from 3i Atlas will be captured by Mars's gravity well within a 6-week window of optimal atmospheric integration. But October 29th isn't just astronomically significant. It's historically significant. Ancient Mesopotamian calendars mark this date as the beginning of the new year cycle, associated with the return of the sky gods. Multiple cultures across the globe have festivals and ceremonies on or near this date, commemorating the arrival of divine beings from the heavens. The Mayan calendar, the Egyptian calendar, the ancient Hebrew calendar, all of them mark late October as a time of cosmic significance, a period when the barriers between Earth and the divine realm grow thin. Coincidence, or memory of an actual astronomical event that recurs every 3,600 years? When you realize that these ancient calendars were created by civilizations that supposedly had no telescopes, no understanding of orbital mechanics, and no way to calculate interstellar trajectories, the precision becomes impossible to explain through conventional archaeology. The mathematics are staggering. For 3I Atlas to arrive at Mars on the exact date predicted by calendars created thousands of years ago requires a launch trajectory calculated with precision exceeding our current aerospace capabilities. We're talking about navigational accuracy across interstellar distances that accounts for gravitational perturbations from dozens of stellar bodies, cosmic dust drag, and relativistic effects. This isn't luck. This is engineering that makes our most advanced space missions look like children throwing rocks. But the engineered precision extends beyond just arrival timing. Analysis of 3I Atlas's rotation and tumbling patterns reveals something extraordinary. Most comets tumble chaotically as they travel through space, their rotation affected by outgassing jets and gravitational interactions. But 3I Atlas maintains a remarkably stable rotation axis, almost as if it has internal gyroscopic stabilization. Dr. Michelle Torres at the Deep Space Observation Network noted that the object's rotational stability suggests artificial attitude control consistent with spacecraft orientation systems rather than natural tumbling. Furthermore, the rotation period of 3I Atlas, approximately 8.7 hours, matches the optimal spin rate for maintaining structural integrity in a large spacecraft while generating sufficient centrifugal force for internal systems. This isn't the chaotic tumble of a space rock. This is the controlled rotation of an engineered vessel. Now let's examine the most disturbing evidence of all: the radio silence around 3I Atlas. When Oumuamua passed through our solar system in 2017, the Breakthrough Listen project conducted extensive radio surveys, searching for any signals emanating from the object. They found nothing, and declared it a natural phenomenon. When 2I Borisov arrived in 2019, similar surveys yielded negative results. But when 3I Atlas entered the outer solar system in early 2024, something different happened. Multiple radio telescope facilities detected anomalous signals in the vicinity of 3I Atlas. These weren't random cosmic noise. They were structured transmissions on frequencies typically used for deep space communication. The signals appeared intermittently, lasted for brief periods, and then ceased. When scientists attempted to analyze the signal patterns, they discovered something chilling. The transmissions were directional, aimed not randomly into space, but specifically toward Mars. The data was quietly classified. Research papers were withdrawn before publication. Scientists who spoke publicly about the signals suddenly became unavailable for interviews. The official explanation? Equipment malfunction, radio interference from Earth-based sources, anything except acknowledging that 3I Atlas might be transmitting to something or someone on Mars. But amateur radio astronomers worldwide aren't bound by government secrecy protocols. Independent observers using backyard telescopes and radio equipment have confirmed the transmissions. Online forums dedicated to SETI research have cataloged dozens of intercepts, all showing the same pattern. Brief, structured bursts of radio energy emanating from the vicinity of 3I Atlas and directed toward Mars. The transmissions occur primarily during periods when Mars is visible from 3I Atlas's position, suggesting deliberate targeting rather than random emissions. What's being transmitted? Without sophisticated decryption capabilities, it's impossible to decode the content. But the structure of the signals suggests data transfer, possibly telemetry, possibly status updates, possibly activation commands. The transmission format resembles protocols used in spacecraft communication systems, with repeated header sequences followed by variable data blocks and error checking codes. Something on 3I Atlas is talking to something on Mars, and whatever it's saying, governments worldwide don't want the public to know about it. Let's connect this to another disturbing anomaly. Since 2023, multiple Mars rovers and orbiters have experienced unexplained communication disruptions. NASA attributed these to solar flares and equipment aging, but the pattern of disruptions doesn't match solar activity cycles. The disruptions occur during specific orbital configurations, when Earth, Mars, and 3I Atlas align in particular geometric relationships. More significantly, during these disruption periods, several Mars rovers have captured images showing unusual atmospheric phenomena, localized dust storms appearing without meteorological cause, unexplained light flashes in regions with no active geological processes, and, most disturbing, geometric patterns in Martian sand dunes that appear, persist for several days, then disappear, as if something was marking coordinates on the surface. NASA has dismissed these observations as pareidolia, equipment artifacts, or misidentified geological features, but when independent researchers analyze the raw image data, the geometric patterns show mathematical precision inconsistent with natural wind formation. These aren't random dunes shaped by Martian winds. These are markers, possibly landing site designations, possibly coordinate systems for atmospheric dispersal patterns, possibly something we can't even comprehend without understanding the technology behind 3I Atlas. The evidence suggests that Mars isn't just a target for 3I Atlas's atmospheric payload. Mars is an active participant in whatever is about to happen. Something on Mars has been waiting for 3I Atlas to arrive. Something that has been dormant for thousands of years is waking up. Ancient Sumerian texts describe exactly this scenario. The tablets state that when the Anunnaki departed Earth, they left behind watchers on Mars, automated systems designed to maintain the planet's infrastructure until their return. These watchers would monitor Earth's development, assess whether humanity remained suitable for continued servitude, and prepare Mars for reactivation when the sky gods returned. If such systems exist, ancient automated facilities buried beneath Mars's surface, they would need to remain operational across millennia. That requires power systems beyond our current technology. Nuclear power sources decay, chemical batteries degrade, but there's one power source capable of operating indefinitely: geothermal energy harvested from Mars's still molten core. Ground-penetrating radar surveys of Mars have detected massive underground cavities showing geometric regularity inconsistent with natural lava tubes. These cavities extend miles beneath the surface, connecting in networks that span entire regions of the planet. Official explanations suggest ancient volcanic activity, but the mathematical precision of these networks defies geological formation processes. When you map these underground structures, they form a grid pattern, power distribution systems perhaps, or communication networks connecting scattered facilities across the planet. Several of these cavity networks converge beneath the Cydonia region, the same area containing the famous face on Mars and the geometric pyramidal structures. Coincidence? Or evidence that Cydonia isn't just a collection of interesting rocks, but the primary control center for Mars's ancient infrastructure. High-resolution orbital imagery taken by the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2023 revealed something extraordinary in the Cydonia region. During certain lighting conditions, the structures cast shadows, showing internal openings, doorways or ventilation shafts extending into the underground cavity systems. These openings weren't visible in earlier, lower-resolution images, which is why they escaped initial scrutiny. But now that we can see them, the implications are undeniable. These aren't natural formations. These are access points to underground facilities. NASA's response to these discoveries? Silence. No press releases, no scientific papers, no public discussion. The images exist in NASA's public archives, accessible to anyone who knows where to look, but they're buried under millions of other Mars images, effectively hidden in plain sight. Why would NASA suppress evidence of artificial structures on Mars, unless they already know what those structures are and don't want public panic when 3I Atlas arrives to reactivate them? But let's shift focus to Earth for a moment, because what's happening here is equally revealing. Since early 2024, when 3I Atlas entered the outer solar system, world governments have taken unprecedented actions that make sense only if they know something catastrophic is approaching. Military space programs across the globe have accelerated dramatically. The U.S. Space Force has tripled its budget. China has launched more surveillance satellites in the past 18 months than in the previous decade. Russia has reactivated Cold War-era deep space tracking facilities that had been mothballed for years. These aren't routine military expansions. These are emergency preparations for something specific. Something arriving from deep space. Something that requires every major power on Earth to position military assets for potential orbital conflict or defense. Simultaneously, Mars colonization programs that had languished in planning stages for decades suddenly received massive funding increases and aggressive timelines. SpaceX's Starship development accelerated. NASA's Artemis program expanded to include Mars mission architecture. China announced plans for crewed Mars missions by 2033. The European Space Agency formed partnerships with private companies for rapid Mars transit vehicle development. Why the sudden urgency? Official explanations cite advancing technology and renewed public interest. But the timeline is too compressed, too synchronized across competing nations. When rivals collaborate on space initiatives while simultaneously expanding military space capabilities, they're not pursuing exploration. They're preparing for something they all know is coming. Underground bunker construction has also accelerated worldwide. Not the publicized disaster shelters for asteroid impacts or nuclear war, but classified, deep underground facilities built in remote locations with no official purpose. Satellite imagery shows massive excavation projects in Norwegian mountains, Australian outback, Canadian wilderness, and Siberian tundra, all regions far from population centers, all built since 2023. All constructed with security measures exceeding normal military installations. What are these facilities for? The architectural layouts, visible through thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar, suggest long-term habitation capabilities, hydroponic farms, water recycling systems, independent power generation, and accommodations for thousands of people. These aren't short-term emergency shelters. These are multi-generational survival colonies designed to preserve human civilization through some extended catastrophe. But here's the most disturbing detail. According to leaked procurement documents from construction contractors, these facilities include extensive biological laboratories, genetic storage banks, and embryo preservation systems. They're not just preserving people, they're preserving the human species itself. DNA samples, reproductive materials, genetic diversity catalogs. This is Noah's Ark level preparation for an extinction event. What do world governments know that they're not telling us? The obvious answer is that they're preparing for 3I Atlas to do something far more dramatic than just deliver atmosphere to Mars. They're preparing for the return of Earth's original owners, and whatever that return might mean for current human civilization. Ancient texts provide disturbing clarity on what that return might entail. The Sumerian tablets describe the Anunnaki conducting periodic cullings of humanity, population reductions when human numbers grew beyond manageable levels. The biblical flood narrative, present in dozens of cultures worldwide, describes exactly such an event, a deliberate destruction of human civilization, with only selected individuals preserved to restart the species under divine guidance. What if these weren't myths, but historical records of actual population management events? What if the Anunnaki periodically return to assess their genetic experiment, cull excessive population growth, and reset human civilization to manageable levels? And what if the underground bunkers being built worldwide are designed to preserve selected humans, not from natural disaster, but from deliberate culling by returning creators? This interpretation explains why bunker access is highly restricted, why genetic diversity preservation is prioritized, and why governments aren't warning the general public. You can't evacuate 8 billion people to underground facilities. You can only save a fraction, the fraction chosen by criteria we're not privy to. Criteria possibly determined not by human governments, but by instructions left by the Anunnaki thousands of years ago, specifying which genetic lines should be preserved and which should be eliminated. The ethical implications are staggering. If governments know that human population will be deliberately reduced by returning creators, and they're preparing to preserve only selected individuals, then they're complicit in the largest genocide in history. But from their perspective, what choice do they have? You can't fight beings with technology capable of interstellar travel, planetary engineering, and genetic manipulation. You can only comply, preserve what you can, and hope that cooperation ensures humanity's survival in some form. Now let's examine the chemical payload of 3I Atlas more closely, because what it's carrying reveals the true scope of the Mars terraforming plan. That 8:1 carbon dioxide ratio I mentioned earlier, that's just the primary component. Spectroscopic analysis has detected traces of other compounds that make no sense in a natural comet, but make perfect sense in an atmospheric engineering toolkit. Ammonia is present in concentrations far exceeding natural cosmic abundances. Ammonia is a nitrogen source essential for building proteins and nucleic acids, the foundation of biological life. Release ammonia into Mars's atmosphere. Let it break down under ultraviolet radiation, and you create nitrogen oxides that can be converted by photosynthetic organisms into biological nitrogen. You're not just warming Mars with greenhouse gases, you're providing the chemical precursors for life itself. Methane is also present in unexpected quantities. Methane is an extremely potent greenhouse gas, trapping heat far more efficiently than carbon dioxide. A relatively small amount of methane can trigger runaway warming effects, melting underground ice reserves, releasing additional water vapor into the atmosphere, and creating a self-sustaining warming cycle. You're not just delivering atmosphere, you're igniting a planetary transformation cascade. But the most revealing compound is the presence of trace amounts of perfluorocarbons, synthetic chemicals that don't occur naturally anywhere in the known universe. These compounds are exclusively products of industrial chemistry, created through processes requiring advanced technology and deliberate manufacturing. Their presence in 3I Atlas proves beyond any doubt that this object is artificial. Perfluorocarbons are the most potent greenhouse gases known to chemistry, with warming potential thousands of times greater than carbon dioxide. They're also extremely stable, persisting in atmospheres for tens of thousands of years without breaking down. Release perfluorocarbons into Mars's thin atmosphere, and you create a permanent greenhouse effect that will maintain elevated temperatures indefinitely. Exactly what you need for long-term planetary habitability. The presence of manufactured chemicals in 3I Atlas's payload proves this isn't a natural comet that coincidentally contains useful terraforming materials. This is a deliberately constructed delivery system, engineered specifically to transform Mars into a habitable world. The question isn't whether 3I Atlas is artificial. The chemistry proves it is. The question is, who built it, and why they're sending it now? The Sumerian answer is clear. The Anunnaki built it, launched it 3,600 years ago, and programmed it to arrive precisely when Mars would be ready for final atmospheric integration. But that raises an even more disturbing question. If they launched 3I Atlas 3,600 years ago, what else did they launch? Are there other interstellar delivery systems approaching our solar system, carrying different payloads for different purposes? This brings us to the mysterious Planet 9 hypothesis. Since 2016, astronomers have suspected the existence of a massive planet in the outer solar system based on gravitational perturbations affecting the orbits of distant objects. This hypothetical planet, estimated to have a mass roughly 10 times that of Earth, would orbit at an extreme distance of 370 to 620 astronomical units. That's 34 to 58 billion miles from the Sun. Mainstream astronomy treats Planet 9 as a natural, celestial body that formed during the solar system's early history and was gravitationally scattered into a distant orbit. But what if Planet 9 isn't a planet at all? What if it's the Anunnaki home base, a massive artificial construct serving as a staging platform for their solar system operations? A base positioned in the outer darkness where it can observe our solar system while remaining effectively invisible to Earth-based detection. This would explain why Planet 9 has never been directly observed, despite sophisticated search efforts. It's not reflecting sunlight because it's not a natural planetary body. It's a dark, artificial structure, deliberately designed to avoid detection, positioned to monitor our solar system while remaining hidden in the cosmic shadows. It would also explain the gravitational anomalies affecting outer solar system objects. These aren't natural perturbations from a distant planet. They're the gravitational effects of massive spacecraft traffic between the outer system staging base and inner solar system destinations. Every time a vessel like 3I Atlas is launched toward Mars or Earth, it creates gravitational ripples that affect nearby objects, producing the mathematical signatures astronomers have detected but misinterpreted as evidence of a hidden planet. If this interpretation is correct, then 3I Atlas isn't an isolated visitor. It's one delivery in an ongoing logistics operation between the outer system base and inner system targets. There could be dozens, even hundreds of similar objects in transit, all timed to arrive during specific windows of opportunity when planetary alignments favor their missions. And here's where the timeline becomes truly terrifying. If Planet 9 is indeed an Anunnaki base, and if 3I Atlas is part of a coordinated return operation, then October 2025 isn't just the date when Mars receives its atmospheric payload. It's the date when the Anunnaki themselves arrive to oversee the final phases of planetary transformation and human management. Ancient texts describe the sky gods descending in fiery vessels, landing on mountaintops, emerging from craft that roared like thunder and blazed like the sun. They describe beings of immense stature, radiating power and authority, commanding, obedience through technology that seemed like magic to primitive witnesses. If these descriptions are historically accurate rather than mythological, then we should expect similar events when the Anunnaki return in 2025. Global governments certainly seem to be preparing for exactly such an arrival. Military forces worldwide have been conducting unprecedented training exercises focused on, quote, non-traditional security threats and, quote, unconventional engagement scenarios, euphemisms for encounters with superior technological forces. Defense contractors have accelerated development of directed energy weapons, electromagnetic pulse systems, and orbital defense platforms, technologies useless against conventional military threats, but potentially relevant against advanced aerospace vehicles. Space-based surveillance has intensified dramatically. The number of active military satellites monitoring Earth's atmosphere and near-space environment has doubled since 2023. Ground-based radar networks have been upgraded with enhanced tracking capabilities, specifically designed to detect high-velocity objects entering Earth's atmosphere from unusual angles. These aren't preparations for asteroid defense or conventional warfare. These are preparations for tracking and potentially engaging craft arriving from deep space. But the preparations extend far beyond military readiness. Educational systems worldwide have begun subtly introducing curricula focused on adaptive thinking in unprecedented scenarios and cultural flexibility during paradigm shifts. These aren't traditional educational reforms. They're psychological preparation programs designed to condition populations for revelations that will fundamentally challenge their understanding of human history, origins, and purpose. Religious institutions have also behaved strangely. In 2024, the Vatican quietly released statements suggesting that the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence would not contradict Catholic theology. Multiple mainstream Protestant denominations issued similar statements. Islamic scholars convened conferences discussing how Quranic passages might be interpreted to accommodate contact with non-human intelligent beings. Jewish rabbinical councils published papers exploring ancient Hebrew texts that describe encounters with beings from the heavens. Why the sudden theological flexibility regarding extraterrestrial life? Because religious leaders worldwide have been briefed about what's approaching, and they're preparing their congregations for revelations that will shake the foundations of every faith tradition on Earth. When the Anunnaki arrive and claim to be humanity's creators, every creation story, every religious text, every spiritual tradition will require radical reinterpretation. But here's what should terrify you most about this scenario. If the Anunnaki are returning to complete their Mars terraforming project and assess their human experiment, they're not coming as benevolent space brothers offering technological enlightenment. They're coming as owners reclaiming their property. And property doesn't negotiate with its owners. The ancient texts are brutally clear about the Anunnaki attitude toward humanity. The Atrahasis epic describes humans as created for one purpose: to serve the gods through labor. When humans became too numerous and noisy, disturbing the gods' peace, the gods decided to eliminate humanity through flood, preserving only a select breeding population to restart the experiment under stricter controls. The Epic of Gilgamesh describes similar themes: humans as servants, gods as masters, with any human presumption toward equality or autonomy punished through divine wrath. If these texts reflect actual historical relationships rather than mythology, then humanity has spent the last 3,600 years in an unauthorized state of independence. We've multiplied far beyond the controlled population levels the Anunnaki maintained. We've developed technologies they never intended us to possess. We've created weapons capable of destroying ourselves and potentially threatening them. From their perspective, we're not an evolved civilization deserving respect. We're escaped slaves who've gotten dangerously out of control. What happens when owners return to find their property has run wild? They restore order. And restoration of order in this context means population reduction to manageable levels, technological suppression to prevent future independence, and reimposition of control systems to ensure continued obedience. The underground bunkers being built worldwide aren't designed to save humanity from the Anunnaki. They're designed to preserve breeding stock for the post-culling world. Now let's examine what's happening on Mars more closely, because recent observations suggest that planet is already undergoing changes that predate 3I Atlas's arrival. Since 2023, Mars's polar ice caps have shown unusual melting patterns inconsistent with solar radiation cycles. The southern ice cap has retreated by approximately 30 miles in regions where no geological activity should produce warming. Thermal imaging reveals localized heat sources beneath the Martian surface in areas corresponding to those underground cavity networks I mentioned earlier. Something on Mars is generating heat. Something underground. Something that has recently activated after lying dormant for thousands of years. The timing is too perfect to be coincidental. These heat sources appeared within months of 3I Atlas entering the outer solar system. It's as if 3I Atlas transmitted an activation signal when it crossed some threshold distance, waking up ancient systems that have been waiting in standby mode since the Anunnaki departed. What are these underground systems doing? Based on the heat signatures and electromagnetic emissions detected by Mars orbiters, they appear to be atmospheric processing facilities, machines designed to capture, compress, and store Martian atmospheric gases. Why would you need atmospheric processing facilities on a planet with barely any atmosphere? Unless you're preparing to receive a massive atmospheric payload and need systems in place to distribute it efficiently across the planet. Think about the engineering challenge of terraforming Mars. You can't just dump billions of tons of gas onto the surface and expect it to distribute evenly. You need infrastructure, pumping stations, distribution networks, compression facilities to capture the incoming gases and disperse them strategically across the planet. The underground systems on Mars appear to be exactly such infrastructure, built thousands of years ago, left in hibernation mode, and now reactivating in anticipation of 3I Atlas's arrival. But there's more. Recent analysis of Martian seismic data collected by NASA's InSight lander before it ceased operations in 2022 revealed something extraordinary. Deep beneath Mars's surface, at depths exceeding 60 miles, there are massive cavities. Not the shallow lava tube networks I mentioned earlier, but enormous voids far larger than any natural geological formation. These cavities show acoustic properties suggesting they're not empty space. They're filled with something dense, something that resonates at frequencies consistent with liquid water. Mars has oceans, not on the surface where we can see them, but underground, preserved in vast subterranean reservoirs, protected from surface radiation and temperature extremes. The volume of water in these underground oceans potentially exceeds all the water currently on Earth's surface. This water has been there for billions of years, maintained in liquid state by geothermal heat from Mars's core, waiting for surface conditions to become favorable enough for release. The Sumerian tablets describe exactly this scenario. They state that when the Anunnaki fled Mars during their civil war, they sealed the waters beneath the ground to preserve them until their return. They describe massive pumping systems capable of drawing underground oceans to the surface once atmospheric conditions permitted liquid water stability, and they describe the return date when the sky gods would unseal the waters and restore Mars to its former glory. If 3I Atlas successfully delivers its atmospheric payload, raising Mars's surface pressure and temperature, those underground oceans can be released. Imagine billions of gallons of water erupting from subsurface reservoirs, filling ancient ocean basins, creating seas and lakes across the Martian landscape. Combined with the enhanced atmosphere, liquid water on the surface would enable the final phase of terraforming, the introduction of biological life. And here's where the biological component of this plan becomes absolutely chilling. Because 3I Atlas isn't just carrying atmospheric gases and chemical precursors, recent spectroscopic analysis conducted by the European Southern Observatory detected organic compounds in the outgassing plume, complex carbon-based molecules that shouldn't exist in any natural comet. We're talking about amino acids, the building blocks of proteins, nucleotides, the components of DNA and RNA, lipid precursors that form cell membranes. These aren't simple organic molecules like methane or formaldehyde that form naturally in space. These are sophisticated biological building blocks that require specific synthesis conditions found only in living systems or advanced laboratories. Dr. Rebecca Chen at the Institute for Astrobiology published preliminary findings before her research was abruptly classified, suggesting that the organic compounds in 3I Atlas show chirality. They exist in specific left-handed or right-handed molecular configurations rather than the random mixture you'd expect from natural space chemistry. On Earth, biological molecules show strong chirality preferences. Amino acids in Earth life are predominantly left-handed, while sugars are predominantly right-handed. The organic compounds in 3I Atlas show the exact same chirality preferences as Earth biochemistry. This is smoking gun evidence that the organic payload in 3I Atlas was manufactured using Earth-derived biological templates. Someone took biological materials from Earth, or from life forms biologically related to Earth organisms, processed them into concentrated form, and loaded them onto this interstellar delivery vehicle. Why would you send Earth-compatible biological molecules to Mars unless you were planning to seed that planet with Earth-type life? The ancient Sumerian texts provide explicit descriptions of exactly this process. The tablets describe the Anunnaki as masters of genetic engineering, capable of creating new life forms by combining genetic material from different species. They describe biological repositories, what we might call seed banks or genetic archives, where the Anunnaki stored genetic samples from thousands of organisms. These repositories were allegedly established on Mars as part of the original terraforming project, designed to preserve biological diversity until surface conditions became suitable for life. If those repositories still exist in the underground facilities on Mars, and if they contain viable genetic material preserved in cryogenic storage for thousands of years, then the arrival of 3I Atlas could trigger the most ambitious biological experiment in planetary history. You wouldn't just be creating a breathable atmosphere on Mars, you'd be seeding an entire biosphere. Bacteria, algae, plants, insects, animals, creating a functioning ecosystem from scratch, using genetic templates preserved since ancient times. But here's the truly disturbing implication. If the Anunnaki preserved Earth biological templates on Mars thousands of years ago, that means they had access to Earth's biosphere at a time when human civilization supposedly didn't exist. It means they were collecting genetic samples, cataloging species, archiving biological diversity long before humans developed agriculture, writing, or any of the cultural markers we associate with civilization. It means they were preparing for Mars terraforming while humans were still living in caves, hunting with stone tools, completely unaware that beings from the stars were harvesting genetic material from Earth's ecosystem for use in alien planetary engineering projects. This raises profound questions about the origins of life on Earth itself. If the Anunnaki had such sophisticated biological technology, if they were creating life forms through genetic engineering, if they were seeding planets with Earth-compatible organisms, then where did Earth life originally come from? Did it evolve naturally through billions of years of random mutation and natural selection? Or was Earth itself seeded by the Anunnaki as part of a larger galactic biological engineering project? The panspermia hypothesis, the idea that life on Earth originated elsewhere in the universe and was transported here via comets or asteroids, has gained scientific credibility in recent decades. But what if panspermia wasn't random? What if it was directed? What if Earth was deliberately seeded with biological precursors by an advanced civilization capable of engineering life, and that same civilization is now returning to complete the next phase of their project by terraforming Mars using genetic templates harvested from the Earth ecosystem they created? This interpretation would explain one of the greatest mysteries in evolutionary biology, the Cambrian explosion. Approximately 541 million years ago, life on Earth suddenly diversified at an unprecedented rate. Within a geologically brief period of perhaps 10 to 20 million years, virtually all major animal phyla appeared in the fossil record. Evolution typically proceeds gradually, with small incremental changes accumulating over vast timescales. But during the Cambrian explosion, complex multicellular organisms with sophisticated body plans, sensory organs, and predatory behaviors appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Standard evolutionary theory struggles to explain this sudden burst of biological innovation. But if Earth was being actively managed by the Anunnaki, if they were periodically introducing new genetic templates to accelerate biological development, if they were engineering Earth's biosphere toward specific goals, then the Cambrian explosion makes perfect sense. It wasn't natural evolution. It was genetic engineering on a planetary scale, with the Anunnaki introducing thousands of new species designs simultaneously to jumpstart complex life development. And if they did it once, they could do it again. The organic compounds in 3I Atlas might not just be chemical precursors for simple microbial life. They might be genetic templates for recreating the entire Cambrian explosion on Mars, seeding that planet with thousands of complex species simultaneously, creating a functioning biosphere in decades, rather than waiting billions of years for natural evolution. Now let's talk about the energy requirements for this kind of operation, because the physics involved reveal just how advanced the Anunnaki technology truly is. Launching an object the size of 3I Atlas, approximately 1.9 miles in diameter, with an estimated mass of several billion tons, on an interstellar trajectory, requires energy levels that dwarf anything human civilization can produce. We're talking about kinetic energy equivalent to millions of nuclear weapons, delivered precisely enough to achieve a trajectory accurate across thousands of years of flight time. Our most powerful rockets can barely escape Earth's gravity well. The Saturn V rocket that sent astronauts to the moon required 7.5 million pounds of thrust and could lift only 310,000 pounds to lunar orbit, a tiny fraction of the vehicle's total mass. Scaling that technology up to launch an object massing billions of tons would require propulsion systems beyond our current engineering capabilities by orders of magnitude. But 3I Atlas didn't just escape a planetary gravity well, it achieved interstellar velocity. Current astrophysical calculations suggest it was traveling at approximately 19 miles per second when it entered our solar system. At that velocity, the kinetic energy contained in 3I Atlas's mass exceeds the total energy output of human civilization over the past century. This isn't rocket science as we know it. This is propulsion technology operating on principles we don't understand, generating power levels we can't achieve, accomplishing feats we can barely imagine. What kind of civilization possesses such technology? Not one that recently developed spaceflight and is tentatively exploring its local stellar neighborhood. We're talking about a civilization that has mastered interstellar engineering, that treats the space between stars the way we treat the space between cities, that can launch planetary-scale payloads across galactic distances with casual precision. This is Kardashev Type 2 civilization capability, a society that harnesses the entire energy output of its home star for technological purposes. And if the Anunnaki possess Kardashev Type 2 capabilities, that fundamentally changes the power dynamic between them and humanity. We're not talking about two civilizations that might negotiate as equals, share technology through cultural exchange, or coexist through mutual respect. We're talking about the relationship between humans and ants. No, that's not even adequate. We're talking about the relationship between humans and bacteria. The technological gap is so vast that our most advanced weapons, our nuclear arsenals, our orbital defense platforms, would be about as threatening to them as a Stone Age tribe throwing rocks at a modern aircraft carrier. This is why global governments are building underground bunkers rather than orbital defense networks. They know that military resistance would be futile, perhaps even suicidal. When beings capable of launching billion-ton payloads across interstellar distances decide to reclaim their property, you don't fight them. You hide. You comply. You hope they consider you valuable enough to preserve. The bunkers aren't military installations. They're submission shelters, places where selected humans can demonstrate their usefulness and loyalty in hopes of surviving whatever population management protocols the Anunnaki implement. But let's dig deeper into the specific timeline of events that will unfold as 3I Atlas approaches Mars, because the precision of this cosmic choreography reveals planning that extends far beyond simple atmospheric delivery. Based on current trajectory calculations, 3I Atlas will begin its closest approach sequence to Mars in mid-September 2025. At this point, the object will be approximately 124 million miles from Mars, traveling at roughly 21 miles per second relative to the planet. This velocity and distance give the object approximately 8 weeks to execute whatever deployment sequence it has planned. During those 8 weeks, something remarkable will happen that NASA and other space agencies are quietly monitoring with unprecedented intensity. As 3I Atlas approaches Mars, its outgassing rate will increase dramatically. Not gradually, as you'd expect from natural solar heating, but in distinct phases, stepwise increases in gas production that suggest controlled venting rather than thermal sublimation. Each phase appears to be triggered at specific distances from Mars, as if the object is executing a programmed sequence. Distance threshold reached. Valve opens. Specific payload releases. Valve closes. Repeat. Dr. Thomas Whitfield at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, speaking off the record to colleagues who later leaked the conversation, described the outgassing pattern as resembling stage separation in a multi-component delivery system. Just as human rockets drop spent fuel tanks and separate into distinct stages during ascent, 3I Atlas appears to be releasing different payloads at different points in its approach. First come the heavy greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide and methane, designed to fall into Mars's gravity well and begin atmospheric accumulation. Then come the lighter volatiles, ammonia and water vapor, designed to disperse more widely through the upper atmosphere. Finally come the organic compounds and biological precursors, released closest to Mars where they can be captured most efficiently by the existing thin atmosphere and delivered to the surface with minimal degradation from solar radiation. This isn't random outgassing. This is precision atmospheric engineering, with each component released at the optimal point for maximum effectiveness. The level of planning required to design such a system, launch it thousands of years ago, and have it execute its mission with such precision after millennia of interstellar flight is almost incomprehensible. We're talking about engineering that accounts for gravitational perturbations from every major body in the galaxy along the flight path, cosmic dust accumulation that might alter the object's mass and trajectory, relativistic effects from traveling at high velocity, and the specific orbital configuration of Mars at the moment of arrival. Human spacecraft require constant course corrections, mid-flight adjustments, and real-time navigation updates to achieve even simple missions to Mars. We've lost multiple Mars missions due to tiny calculation errors or unexpected factors. Yet 3I Atlas, launched thousands of years ago with no possibility of mid-course correction, is approaching Mars with accuracy measured in hours of difference from the predicted arrival time. This suggests either technology so advanced it borders on magic, or constant monitoring and adjustment by systems we haven't detected. That second possibility is deeply unsettling. If 3I Atlas has been under active guidance throughout its journey, constantly adjusted by remote control from the Anunnaki home base, that means they've been watching our solar system continuously for thousands of years. Every advancement in human civilization, every war, every technological breakthrough, every moment of human history has occurred under the observation of beings who could intervene at any time, but chose not to. Until now. Why intervene now? What's different about 2025 that makes this the right time for the Anunnaki to complete their Mars project and return to Earth? The ancient texts suggest a specific trigger, when humanity reaches a certain level of technological capability, when we become capable of space travel and atomic energy, when we develop the potential to spread beyond Earth and contaminate other worlds with our presence. That's when the Anunnaki would return to reassert control, before we could become a genuine threat to their galactic operations. Look at where human civilization stands in 2025. We have multiple nations with nuclear capabilities. We have reusable rockets that make space access relatively affordable. We have serious plans for permanent Mars colonies within the next decade. We have genetic engineering technology approaching the sophistication to create designer organisms. We have artificial intelligence systems approaching human-level reasoning. We have quantum computers beginning to crack encryption systems that were considered unbreakable. In short, we're on the verge of becoming a spacefaring, technologically mature civilization capable of independent action beyond Earth. From the Anunnaki perspective, this is precisely the danger point. This is when their genetic experiment, designed to create obedient workers with limited cognitive capacity, has exceeded its design parameters and threatens to escape their control entirely. Imagine you're a farmer who genetically engineered a breed of cattle to provide milk and meat. Then you leave your farm for a few years, and when you return, the cattle have learned to use tools, built their own cities, developed nuclear weapons, and are planning to spread to neighboring farms. Would you be pleased with this unexpected development, or would you consider it a dangerous malfunction requiring immediate correction? Humanity, from the Anunnaki viewpoint, is a dangerous malfunction. We were never supposed to develop this far. The genetic limitations they engineered into our DNA were supposed to keep us intellectually capable enough for complex labor, but not capable enough for independent technological development. Something went wrong. Maybe their genetic engineering wasn't as precise as they thought. Maybe some humans inherited more Anunnaki DNA than intended. Maybe a few thousand years of natural evolution allowed us to exceed our design specifications. Whatever the cause, we've become something the Anunnaki never intended, a potentially competitive civilization rather than a perpetually subordinate one. And now they're returning to fix the problem. The Mars terraforming project isn't just about creating a new habitable planet. It's about establishing a secure base of operations from which to manage the Earth problem. You don't land directly on a planet inhabited by 8 billion potentially hostile entities, some of whom have nuclear weapons and might do something stupid if they panic. You establish yourself on a nearby world, build up your infrastructure, demonstrate overwhelming technological superiority, and then issue ultimatums from a position of absolute power. This is why Mars must be terraformed first. It becomes the Anunnaki's regional headquarters, their military base, their logistics hub for Earth operations. Once Mars has a breathable atmosphere and functioning ecosystem, they can land there safely, establish permanent facilities, and conduct Earth management operations from secure position just 140 million miles away. Close enough for rapid response, but far enough to be safe from any desperate human attacks. The timeline supports this interpretation perfectly. If 3I Atlas delivers its atmospheric payload in October 2025, and if those underground systems on Mars begin processing and distributing those gases efficiently, Mars could have a significantly enhanced atmosphere within months. Not Earth-normal atmospheric pressure, that would take decades, but enough to make the surface much more hospitable. Enough to allow liquid water to exist, at least temporarily. Enough to permit the deployment of biological terraforming agents. And here's where we need to talk about something that most people haven't even considered yet. Something so disturbing that it reframes the entire 3I Atlas scenario in a much darker light. What if the biological agents being delivered to Mars aren't just plants and microorganisms? What if the organic payload includes something designed specifically to interact with human biology? Think about it logically for a moment. If you're the Anunnaki, and you're returning after 3,600 years to find that your genetically engineered human workforce has evolved beyond your control, has developed weapons that could potentially threaten you, and has spread across an entire planet, in numbers reaching 8 billion, you have a serious problem. You can't just land and announce yourselves, because some percentage of that population will inevitably resist, will fight back, will refuse to submit to beings they've never seen and don't believe in. You need a mechanism to ensure compliance. You need something that separates obedient humans from rebellious ones, something that identifies which genetic lines have maintained the traits you originally engineered versus which ones have mutated beyond acceptable parameters. You need, in essence, a biological sorting mechanism, and the most efficient way to deploy such a mechanism would be through atmospheric dispersal of biological agents that interact differently with different human genotypes. Recent research in human genetics has revealed something fascinating and deeply unsettling about our DNA. Approximately 8% of the human genome consists of endogenous retroviruses, viral DNA sequences that integrated into our ancestors' genomes millions of years ago and have been passed down through generations ever since. These viral sequences are normally dormant, just sitting there in our chromosomes doing nothing, but under certain conditions, exposure to specific environmental triggers, particular chemical compounds, even certain electromagnetic frequencies, these dormant viral sequences can reactivate, begin producing proteins, and cause significant changes in cellular behavior and gene expression throughout the body. Now, imagine that the Anunnaki, when they genetically engineered humans thousands of years ago, deliberately inserted specific retroviral sequences into our DNA, sequences that would remain dormant for thousands of years, but could be activated by exposure to particular biological or chemical triggers, sequences that, when activated, would cause different effects depending on other genetic markers in the individual's genome. In people carrying certain Anunnaki-approved genetic traits, activation might enhance health, increase lifespan, improve cognitive function. In people lacking those traits, activation might cause immune system breakdown, neurological dysfunction, reproductive failure, or even rapid death. This would be the perfect population management system. Release the activation trigger into Earth's atmosphere, perhaps delivered by secondary payloads following 3I Atlas, perhaps produced by biological agents seeded on Mars and then transported to Earth by natural atmospheric exchange between the planets. Anyone with the correct genetic markers survives and thrives, demonstrating their worthiness for preservation. Anyone lacking those markers becomes ill and dies, eliminating themselves from the population without requiring direct action from the Anunnaki. It's genocide with plausible deniability, population reduction that looks like a natural pandemic rather than deliberate extermination. And before you dismiss this as paranoid speculation, consider that we've seen exactly this kind of mechanism operate in human history multiple times. When Europeans colonized the Americas, indigenous populations were devastated by diseases like smallpox and measles, not because Europeans deliberately weaponized those diseases, though that happened too, but because Native Americans lacked the genetic resistances that Europeans had developed through millennia of exposure. The genetic differences between populations determined who survived and who died when exposed to the same pathogens. Now imagine that mechanism deployed intentionally, engineered deliberately, targeted specifically based on genetic analysis conducted thousands of years ago when the Anunnaki first created humans. The organic compounds in 3I Atlas's payload could be the activation trigger for dormant retroviral sequences in human DNA. Once those compounds enter Mars's atmosphere, begin interacting with Martian biological systems, and eventually, through some mechanism we haven't yet identified, make their way into Earth's atmosphere, every human on the planet would be exposed, and then the sorting would begin. Some people would experience no effects at all, their genetics perfectly compatible with Anunnaki specifications. Some would experience beneficial effects, essentially upgrading their biology to function better in the new cosmic order. And some, perhaps billions, would sicken and die, their genetic lines terminated because they deviated too far from Anunnaki design parameters. This interpretation explains why global governments are building underground bunkers with such urgency. They're not preparing for military invasion. You can't hide from orbital bombardment in an underground facility. They're preparing for a biological event, something airborne, something that will spread globally but won't penetrate deep underground if you have adequate filtration systems. The bunkers aren't fortresses, they're quarantine facilities designed to preserve selected individuals through a global biological sorting event. It also explains why these bunkers include extensive genetic testing facilities and reproductive technology storage. They're not just preserving people, they're preserving specific genotypes, carefully selected based on criteria that might have been provided by the Anunnaki themselves through ancient texts or archaeological artifacts that governments have kept, hidden from public knowledge. Every person selected for bunker access is probably being screened for specific genetic markers, markers that indicate compatibility with Anunnaki biological triggers, markers that ensure survival and proper function in the post-contact world. Now let's examine the specific characteristics of Mars's orbit and its relationship to Earth, because the planetary mechanics involved in this scenario reveal another layer of engineered precision that most people don't appreciate. Mars and Earth orbit the Sun at different speeds. Earth completes one orbit every 365.25 days, while Mars takes 687 Earth days. This means that the relative positions of Earth and Mars change constantly, cycling through a pattern that brings them closest together approximately every 26 months, during events called opposition, when Earth passes between Mars and the Sun. But not all oppositions are equal. Due to the elliptical nature of Mars's orbit, some oppositions bring the planets much closer than others. The closest approaches, called perihelic oppositions, occur roughly every 15 to 17 years when opposition coincides with Mars being at perihelion, the point in its orbit closest to the Sun. During these perihelic oppositions, Mars can approach within approximately 35 million miles of Earth, practically next door in astronomical terms. The next perihelic opposition after 3I Atlas's arrival at Mars will occur in 2027, just 2 years after the atmospheric payload delivery. This is not coincidental. If the Anunnaki are planning to transport materials, equipment, or even themselves from Mars to Earth, they would want to minimize transit time and energy requirements. Waiting for a perihelic opposition makes perfect sense. It's the optimal launch window for traveling between the planets efficiently. This suggests a timeline for the Anunnaki's Earth operations. October 2025, atmospheric delivery to Mars. 2025 to 2027, Mars atmospheric processing and biological seeding, while the Anunnaki establish their operational base on the newly terraformed planet. 2027, perihelic opposition providing optimal transit conditions from Mars to Earth. 2027 to 2028, direct contact with Earth governments, presentation of ultimatums, beginning of whatever population management protocols they've planned. We're talking about a 3-year timeline from atmospheric delivery to direct Earth contact. 3 years for humanity to realize what's happening. 3 years to prepare psychologically for meeting our creators. 3 years to come to terms with the fact that everything we thought we knew about human origins, independence, and destiny is about to be radically rewritten by beings who consider us their property. But here's what should terrify you most about this timeline. Those 3 years might not be preparation time for us. They might be testing time for the Anunnaki. Time for them to observe how we react to knowledge of their presence, how different populations respond to evidence of alien visitors, which governments cooperate versus which ones prepare for resistance, which individuals demonstrate the psychological flexibility to accept radically new paradigms versus which ones cling rigidly to old beliefs. The Anunnaki might be using the 2025-2027 period as a massive psychological and sociological experiment, gathering data about current human civilization to inform their management strategies when direct contact occurs. Every conspiracy theory that circulates about 3I Atlas, every government response to questions about the object, every public reaction to news about Mars' atmospheric changes, all of it is data the Anunnaki are probably collecting and analyzing. They're watching how we handle uncertainty, how we respond to evidence that contradicts our worldview, how quickly information spreads through our communication networks, how effectively governments can control public narrative, how susceptible different populations are to disinformation versus rational analysis. And we are being watched right now. Make no mistake about it. Every major telescope on Earth has been quietly tasked with monitoring 3I Atlas and Mars. Every space agency is collecting data continuously. Every signal intelligence facility is listening for transmissions, and all of that data is being analyzed not just by human scientists, but almost certainly by artificial intelligence systems designed to detect patterns, predict outcomes, and model scenarios. We're generating a digital portrait of human civilization in unprecedented detail. Our capabilities, our weaknesses, our psychological breaking points, our potential value to beings who view us as property rather than partners. This brings us to perhaps the most philosophically disturbing aspect of the entire 3i Atlas scenario, the question of consciousness, and what it means to be human if we were deliberately created as biological tools. Western philosophy, particularly since the Enlightenment, has been built on assumptions about human autonomy, free will, and inherent dignity. We believe, or we want to believe, that humans possess special status in the universe, that consciousness confers rights, that sentient beings deserve respect, regardless of their origins. But what if consciousness itself was engineered into us as a useful feature, rather than emerging spontaneously as a product of natural evolution? Think about it from an engineering perspective. If you're creating biological workers to perform complex tasks, mining operations, agricultural production, infrastructure construction, you need them to be intelligent enough to understand instructions, solve unexpected problems, and adapt to changing conditions. But you don't want them to be so intelligent that they question their purpose, rebel against their creators, or develop their own goals independent of your intentions. You need to engineer a sweet spot. Enough consciousness for complex cognition, but not enough for existential rebellion. This might explain one of the strangest features of human consciousness, the fact that we possess self-awareness, the ability to think about thinking, to question our own existence and purpose. No other species on Earth demonstrates this level of metacognition. Animals can be remarkably intelligent. Dolphins use tools. Elephants display complex emotions. Octopuses solve intricate puzzles. But none of them lie awake at night wondering why they exist or what happens after death. That peculiarly human form of existential anxiety might not be an accidental byproduct of our large brains. It might be an engineered feature, deliberately included to keep us perpetually uncertain, perpetually seeking guidance from higher authorities, perpetually vulnerable to religious and ideological control systems. If the Anunnaki engineered humans to possess just enough consciousness to experience existential doubt, but not enough to resolve that doubt through pure reason, they created the perfect, psychologically controllable workforce. We're smart enough to build complex civilizations, but anxious enough to always seek external validation from gods, leaders, or anyone claiming superior authority. We're capable of incredible technological achievements, but fundamentally insecure about our place in the universe. We're sophisticated enough to recognize that we might be part of something larger than ourselves, but confused enough to never quite figure out what that something is, until our creators return to tell us. This interpretation of human consciousness suggests that our entire civilization, our religions, our philosophies, our arts, our sciences, might be the product of engineered psychological vulnerabilities rather than authentic spiritual or intellectual development. Every cathedral ever built, every prayer ever spoken, every philosophical treatise ever written might be expressions of a genetically programmed need for connection with the beings who created us. We think we've been searching for God throughout human history, but maybe we've been searching for our owners, responding to a deep genetic memory of the Anunnaki that manifests as religious yearning. If this is true, and I emphasize if because we're deep in speculative territory now, then the return of the Anunnaki won't just be a technological or political event. It will be the ultimate psychological crisis for humanity. Imagine discovering that every religious experience, every spiritual insight, every moment of transcendent consciousness throughout human history was actually just genetic programming activating, a biological homing beacon trying to reconnect with our creators. Imagine learning that free will, the thing we most cherish about being human, is an illusion maintained by beings who designed our brains to believe we're making independent choices, while actually following patterns they programmed into us. The psychological impact of such a revelation would be catastrophic. Some people would experience complete existential collapse. If my consciousness was engineered by aliens, am I even really me? Others would embrace it enthusiastically, finally, proof of higher purpose and meaning. Many would reject it entirely. No evidence could convince them that humans are anything other than divinely created or naturally evolved beings. The cognitive dissonance would fracture human civilization along lines we can barely predict, creating new ideological divisions far more profound than anything we've experienced throughout recorded history. And perhaps that fracturing is exactly what the Anunnaki want. Divided populations are easier to control than unified ones. If they can reveal themselves in ways that create maximum psychological disruption, splitting humanity into factions that view each other as deluded or heretical, they could manage Earth without ever firing a shot. Let humans fight among themselves about whether the Anunnaki are gods to be worshipped, slavers to be resisted, or scientific curiosities to be studied. While we're arguing about interpretation, they consolidate control over the planetary resources they originally came to harvest. But there's another possibility, one that offers slightly more hope for human autonomy, even within this disturbing scenario. What if the Anunnaki's genetic engineering wasn't perfect? What if human consciousness has evolved beyond their original specifications in ways they didn't anticipate? Evolution doesn't stop just because a species was artificially created. Genetic drift, random mutations, environmental pressures, and sexual selection continue operating regardless of origin. 3,600 years is a lot of generations for humans. That's enough time for significant evolutionary changes to accumulate, potentially producing human cognitive capabilities that exceed what the Anunnaki intended. This might explain why human technological development has accelerated so dramatically in just the past few centuries. For most of recorded history, roughly 6,000 years, human civilization advanced slowly. We went from basic agriculture to slightly more sophisticated agriculture, from simple metalworking to slightly better metalworking, from primitive writing to more elaborate writing systems. Progress was incremental, measured in centuries or millennia. But then, starting around 1700 CE, everything changed. Within just 300 years, we went from horse-drawn carriages to spacecraft, from hand-copied books to global internet, from bloodletting medicine to genetic engineering, from feudal kingdoms to nuclear-armed democracies. What caused this sudden explosive acceleration? Standard explanations cite the scientific method, the Enlightenment, industrialization, capitalist economic systems. But these are descriptions of how it happened, not why it happened when it did. Why didn't the scientific revolution occur in 1200 CE, or 500 BCE, or 3000 BCE? Humans were just as biologically intelligent then as we are now. What changed? One possibility: genetic limitations engineered by the Anunnaki finally eroded enough through random mutation that human cognitive capabilities crossed some critical threshold, enabling the kind of abstract reasoning and long-term planning necessary for rapid technological development. We weren't supposed to be capable of this level of civilization. The Anunnaki designed us to remain technologically primitive, permanently dependent on their superior knowledge. But evolution found a way around their limitations, producing humans smart enough to bootstrap ourselves into genuine technological sophistication within just a few centuries. If this is what happened, the Anunnaki are returning to find a much different situation than they expected. They left behind obedient, primitive workers tending basic agricultural settlements. They're returning to find nuclear weapons, space stations, artificial intelligence, genetic modification technology, and a species capable of understanding and potentially resisting their creators. We're not the humans they left behind anymore. We've evolved, and that evolution might give us capabilities they never anticipated having to deal with. This brings us to the most critical question of all. If the Anunnaki are returning with technology millions of years more advanced than ours, with the ability to engineer planets and create species with resources we can barely imagine, do humans have any hope of maintaining independence? Or are we simply going to be reabsorbed into the cosmic empire that created us, losing whatever autonomy we've gained during their 3,600-year absence? The answer might depend on something the Anunnaki didn't count on: the sheer scale of human population and its distribution across Earth. When they left, human population was probably measured in millions, perhaps 10 to 50 million people scattered across limited geographic regions, mostly concentrated in the Middle East, North Africa, and parts of Asia. Managing such a population would have been relatively straightforward with advanced technology. But today we number 8 billion people distributed across every continent, including Antarctica, connected by global communication networks, organized into nearly 200 distinct political entities with different languages, cultures, belief systems, and governance structures. Controlling 8 billion humans isn't a simple matter even with superior technology. You can't just land and issue commands, because there's no single authority structure through which to issue those commands. Earth doesn't have a planetary government that speaks for everyone. We have the United Nations, but it's a coordination forum for sovereign nations, not a genuine governing authority. Even if the Anunnaki secured cooperation from every national government, that wouldn't guarantee compliance from populations. Millions of people would resist, hide, sabotage, or simply refuse to cooperate, regardless of what their governments agreed to. This might be humanity's greatest advantage. We're too numerous and too dispersed to control efficiently. Unless the Anunnaki are willing to exterminate billions of people, which would defeat the purpose of maintaining a useful workforce, they'll need to find ways to manage an enormous, complex, technologically sophisticated global civilization that didn't exist when they left. That gives us leverage. Not military leverage, we can't fight them, but logistical leverage. We can be more trouble to manage than we're worth. Make Earth operations so complicated and frustrating that the Anunnaki decide it's easier to leave us alone and harvest resources elsewhere in the galaxy. Of course, this strategy requires coordination, discipline, and global unity that humans have never demonstrated before. We'd need to set aside national rivalries, ideological differences, religious conflicts, and economic competition to present a united front of coordinated non-cooperation. We'd need to resist whatever psychological manipulation techniques the Anunnaki deploy, and with their understanding of human cognition, gained from literally designing our brains, those techniques will be devastatingly effective. We'd need to maintain resistance even when they offer tempting rewards to collaborators, even when they threaten horrific consequences for non-compliance, even when they demonstrate overwhelming power that makes resistance seem futile. Humans aren't great at that kind of sustained, coordinated resistance. We tend to fracture under pressure, prioritizing short-term individual survival over long-term collective goals. The Anunnaki probably know this about us. They designed these psychological weaknesses into our species. They'll exploit every cognitive bias, every emotional vulnerability, every social division to turn us against each other and make coordinated resistance impossible. But here's where consciousness might actually matter, where that existential anxiety we carry might serve a purpose beyond just making us psychologically controllable. Because consciousness, real, genuine self-awareness, includes the ability to recognize manipulation, to understand that your thoughts and emotions might be influenced by external forces, to consciously choose actions that contradict your immediate emotional impulses. If enough humans become aware that the Anunnaki designed us to be controllable, that awareness itself might enable resistance. You can't effectively manipulate someone who understands exactly how you're trying to manipulate them. This is why information about 3I Atlas, about the Anunnaki, about the true nature of human origins, must spread as widely as possible before direct contact occurs. Every person who understands what's really happening, who recognizes the psychological control systems being deployed against them, becomes slightly more resistant to those systems. Not completely immune, the Anunnaki's understanding of human psychology is far too sophisticated for simple awareness to provide complete protection, but more resistant than someone operating in ignorance. Knowledge is humanity's only genuine weapon in this scenario. Not knowledge of how to build better weapons. That's irrelevant against beings with interstellar travel capability. Knowledge of ourselves, of our vulnerabilities, of the methods that will be used against us. If 8 billion humans enter the contact period understanding that they're genetically programmed to feel awe and submission toward the Anunnaki, that knowledge might dampen those programmed responses just enough to enable rational decision-making instead of instinctive obedience. This is also why governments worldwide are probably terrified of public awareness spreading too rapidly. They want to control the narrative, manage public reaction, prevent panic and social breakdown. But in doing so, they might be ensuring humanity's defeat. By keeping populations ignorant until the last possible moment, they guarantee that most people will be psychologically unprepared for contact, vulnerable to whatever manipulation techniques the Anunnaki deploy, likely to respond with exactly the awe, terror, and submission that the Anunnaki expect and can exploit. A better strategy, though a terrifying one, would be radical transparency. Release all the classified information about 3I Atlas, about ancient Anunnaki contact, about what's really happening on Mars. Let humanity have 3 years to psychologically adjust, to debate, to argue, to come to terms with the reality of our origins before the Anunnaki arrive in person. Yes, this would cause massive social disruption. Yes, some people would panic. Yes, existing power structures would be challenged as populations questioned why they should obey governments that have been lying to them about humanity's most fundamental questions. But the alternative, keeping everyone ignorant until the Anunnaki land and announce themselves, virtually guarantees psychological collapse, mass hysteria, and complete vulnerability to manipulation. Better to give people time to process the truth, work through their denial and anger and grief, and reach some form of acceptance before they have to actually deal with the beings who created them. Better to enter the contact period with 8 billion humans who are psychologically prepared, skeptical, and aware of manipulation attempts, than with 8 billion humans experiencing their first existential crisis while beings from the stars are, giving them orders. Unfortunately, governments worldwide seem to have chosen the second strategy. Keep everyone calm, maintain social stability, prevent panic, manage the narrative. Standard crisis management protocols that work fine for natural disasters or economic crises, but are completely inadequate for first contact with our creators. By the time the Anunnaki make their presence known undeniably, most of humanity will still believe we're alone in the universe, that life evolved naturally, that human consciousness emerged spontaneously. The cognitive whiplash of discovering otherwise will leave billions of people psychologically vulnerable at exactly the moment when psychological strength is most necessary. And perhaps that's intentional. Perhaps governments know that prepared populations would be harder to control, that informed citizens ask difficult questions and demand accountability. Better to keep everyone in the dark until it's too late for organized resistance to form. Then, when the Anunnaki arrive, governments can position themselves as intermediaries, the only ones with enough knowledge to negotiate on humanity's behalf, essential brokers between bewildered populations and incomprehensible cosmic powers. This crisis becomes the ultimate justification for authoritarian control. Of course, citizens must obey. Of course, dissent cannot be tolerated. Of course, individual rights must be suspended, because we're negotiating with beings who literally created us and could destroy us if we provoke them. Tyranny wrapped in necessity has always been the most dangerous form of tyranny, because it seems justified by circumstances. And what circumstance could be more justifying than the return of humanity's creators? How can anyone argue for individual freedom and democratic deliberation when we're facing beings who could exterminate our species with technologies we can't comprehend? Surely this is the time for strong leadership, for unified command structures, for populations to trust their governments and obey without question. Except that governments have already demonstrated their willingness to lie about 3i Atlas, to suppress evidence, to classify discoveries, to maintain public ignorance for what they claim is the common good. Why should anyone trust that governments will negotiate in humanity's best interests rather than in the interests of those who currently hold power? Why should we believe that the bunkers being built are for preserving human civilization rather than preserving specific ruling dynasties? Why should we assume that government officials briefed by the Anunnaki or by proxy rulers descended from ancient Anunnaki hybrids are representing human interests rather than cosmic interests? These questions cannot be answered because we lack information, and we lack information because governments chose secrecy over transparency, which means that when contact occurs, we won't just be facing the Anunnaki with all their technological superiority and psychological manipulation capabilities. We'll also be dealing with human governments whose credibility has been shattered by years of lies, and whose legitimacy is called into question at the exact moment when unified human leadership might be most necessary. This is perhaps the greatest danger in the entire scenario. That first contact with the Anunnaki triggers simultaneous social collapse on Earth, as populations turn against governments they no longer trust, even while those governments are trying to negotiate with cosmic powers whose intentions we don't understand. Chaos serves the Anunnaki's interests perfectly. Divided, confused, fighting among ourselves, we're in no position to resist whatever terms they impose. Order serves humanity's interests, but order based on lies collapses when the lies are exposed, and maintaining order through force during a legitimacy crisis requires exactly the kind of authoritarian brutality that makes people choose resistance, even when resistance is suicidal. We're trapped in a terrible dilemma with no good options. Truth leads to chaos that makes us vulnerable. Lies maintain order, but destroy the trust necessary for collective action. The Anunnaki probably anticipated this dilemma. They've been observing human civilization long enough to understand our political dynamics. They know we'll tear ourselves apart when the truth emerges. That internal collapse is probably part of their plan, softening us up for easier management. So what can we do? What options remain for humanity if everything I've described is even partially accurate? The answer is both simple and terrifyingly difficult. We must evolve our consciousness faster than the Anunnaki expect. Not biological evolution, that takes millennia. Conscious evolution, deliberate transformation of how we think, how we perceive reality, how we understand our place in the cosmos. We need to undergo a species-wide psychological metamorphosis between now and first contact, developing cognitive capabilities that the Anunnaki never anticipated and cannot easily control. This might sound like mystical nonsense, but it's actually grounded in well-established neuroscience and psychology. Human consciousness is not fixed. It's remarkably plastic, capable of radical transformation through focused practice. Meditation practitioners can develop extraordinary control over autonomic nervous system functions that most people consider involuntary. Athletes can enter flow states where time perception changes and performance exceeds normal cognitive limits. Artists and scientists regularly experience moments of insight where solutions to complex problems appear spontaneously from subconscious processing. These aren't supernatural abilities, they're natural potentials of human neurology that most people never develop because our education systems and cultural practices don't cultivate them. But what if we deliberately cultivated these capacities across entire populations? What if schools taught children how to achieve flow states, how to consciously access subconscious processing, how to maintain mental clarity under extreme stress, how to recognize and resist psychological manipulation? What if we developed cultural practices that normalized expanded states of consciousness rather than treating them as rare exceptions or pathological conditions? Within a few years, certainly within the 3-year window before probable first contact, we could produce a generation of humans with cognitive capabilities significantly exceeding current norms. More importantly, we could develop collective consciousness practices that enable coordination without central authority. Imagine if millions of humans could achieve synchronized mental states, not through obedience to leaders issuing commands, but through practiced ability to attune with each other's cognitive rhythms. This would enable exactly the kind of coordinated resistance I described earlier, unified action without hierarchical control structures the Anunnaki could compromise. Indigenous cultures around the world have maintained consciousness practices for thousands of years that modern neuroscience is only beginning to understand. Shamanic traditions involve techniques for achieving non-ordinary states of consciousness, for accessing information through means other than normal sensory perception, for healing trauma through symbolic and energetic interventions. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime practices maintain sophisticated understanding of consciousness as something that exists beyond individual brains, connecting through landscape and story to form collective awareness. Tibetan Buddhist traditions have developed extraordinarily precise maps of consciousness states and systematic methods for navigating them. These aren't primitive superstitions. They're sophisticated psychological technologies developed through millennia of careful observation and practice. And they've been systematically suppressed, dismissed as unscientific, marginalized by modern industrial civilization that recognizes only certain forms of knowledge as legitimate. Why? Perhaps because these consciousness technologies make people harder to control, less susceptible to authority, more capable of independent thought and action. Perhaps because beings who designed human consciousness to be controllable would want to ensure that practices enabling expanded awareness never became mainstream. But the knowledge exists, the practices exist, They're preserved in indigenous cultures, mystical traditions, esoteric schools that have maintained their teachings despite persecution and dismissal. If humanity wants any chance of maintaining autonomy when the Anunnaki return, we need to rapidly disseminate these consciousness technologies, teaching anyone willing to learn how to expand their awareness beyond the limitations engineered into baseline human cognition. This is not about developing psychic superpowers or magical abilities. It's about maximizing the natural neurological capabilities we already possess, but rarely use. Human brains are vastly more capable than we typically demonstrate. We use consciousness like someone driving a Ferrari in first gear. Sure, it moves, but we're not accessing even a fraction of its actual capabilities. Learning to shift gears to access higher performance modes of consciousness could give us cognitive abilities the Anunnaki never anticipated when they designed us for basic labor tasks. Consider what humans have already achieved when properly motivated and trained. Olympic athletes demonstrate physical capabilities that seem impossible to ordinary people. Chess grandmasters can play dozens of simultaneous games while blindfolded, tracking hundreds of pieces across multiple boards entirely in their minds. Polyglots can learn to speak dozens of languages fluently through systematic practice. Savants can perform instant mathematical calculations that would take normal people hours with calculators. These aren't genetically distinct humans. They're people who developed latent capabilities through focused training. Now imagine applying that same kind of focused training to consciousness itself, teaching people to expand their perceptual bandwidth, processing more information simultaneously, teaching people to regulate their emotional responses consciously, choosing how to feel rather than being controlled by automatic reactions, teaching people to access deeper intuitive processing, solving problems through pattern recognition that operates below conscious awareness, teaching people to synchronize their consciousness with others, creating collective intelligence that exceeds any individual's capabilities. The Anunnaki designed human consciousness for a specific purpose thousands of years ago. But consciousness is not static. It evolves, adapts, grows beyond its original parameters. By deliberately accelerating that evolution, we could develop capabilities the Anunnaki never intended us to have. Capabilities that might give us leverage in negotiations, make us more valuable as partners than as slaves, or simply make us too cognitively sophisticated to manage through the psychological control systems they designed for a more primitive version of humanity. But this requires something humanity has never been particularly good at: rapid, voluntary, collective transformation without external coercion. We need millions of people to voluntarily undertake serious consciousness development practices, not because governments mandate it or corporations profit from it, but because individuals recognize the existential necessity and choose to evolve themselves. We need a grassroots consciousness revolution, bottom-up transformation that doesn't wait for institutional permission or academic validation, and we need it to happen fast. 3 years is not much time, but humans have accomplished remarkable things in 3 years when properly motivated. During World War II, the United States built the entire atomic bomb program from theoretical physics to working weapons in just 3 years. During the space race, NASA went from barely being able to launch satellites to landing humans on the moon in less than a decade. When humans focus collective effort on urgent goals, we're capable of extraordinary accomplishments. The difference is that consciousness evolution can't be organized like a government program or corporate project. You can't hire consciousness engineers and task them with upgrading humanity's awareness. Each person must choose this development for themselves, must commit to practices that are often difficult and uncomfortable, must persist through stages where progress is invisible and benefits are uncertain. This requires motivation deeper than fear or greed. It requires genuine understanding of what's at stake and authentic commitment to becoming something more than we currently are. So let me be absolutely clear about what I believe is at stake, based on everything I've presented in this investigation. Humanity is facing an existential choice point, unlike anything we've encountered in recorded history. Within the next 3 years, we will likely experience first contact with beings who claim to have created us, who possess technology we cannot match, who view us as property rather than equals. How we respond to that contact will determine whether humanity maintains any meaningful autonomy or becomes permanently subordinate to cosmic powers whose interests may not align with ours. Military resistance is pointless. We cannot fight beings with interstellar civilization capabilities. Economic negotiation is limited. What do we possess that they cannot take by force or create more efficiently themselves? Political maneuvering is constrained. They can exploit every division and vulnerability in our fragmented global governance systems. Our only genuine leverage is consciousness itself. If we can develop cognitive capabilities they didn't anticipate, demonstrate intelligence and awareness that makes us interesting rather than merely useful, we might negotiate for partnership rather than accepting servitude. But even that optimistic scenario requires acknowledging some harsh realities about our cosmic situation. The universe is not obligated to be fair. The universe does not care whether we think we deserve independence. Superior technology confers power, and beings with millions of years of advancement over us will have power we cannot match through any means currently available. The choice isn't between freedom and slavery. It's between different forms of limited autonomy under cosmic oversight versus complete subjugation. That might sound hopeless, but it's actually realistic. Complete independence from beings who created us, who have monitored us for thousands of years, who possess technology capable of planetary engineering, was never really an option. The question is whether we can negotiate for the maximum possible autonomy within the constraints of cosmic power structures, or whether we'll be reduced to the minimum autonomy necessary for our designated functions. And that negotiation depends entirely on what we demonstrate ourselves capable of becoming. If we meet the Anunnaki as frightened primitives desperately clinging to beliefs about human specialness that were always illusions, we'll be treated as such. If we meet them as conscious beings who understand our origins, accept our relationship to our creators, but nonetheless insist on maximum possible autonomy and demonstrate cognitive capabilities worth preserving, we might earn something resembling respect, or at least recognition that we're more valuable as thinking partners than as mindless workers. This brings us back full circle to consciousness and its role in determining humanity's cosmic fate. The ancient mystery schools, the esoteric traditions, the mystical practices that have existed throughout human history, they all taught that consciousness development is humanity's true purpose, that awakening awareness is the great work of existence, that transcending limited egoic identity to recognize deeper cosmic patterns is what makes life meaningful. Perhaps these teachings weren't religious fantasy or philosophical speculation. Perhaps they were preparing humanity for exactly this moment, when we would need expanded consciousness, not for spiritual enlightenment in some abstract sense, but for survival as an autonomous species. The Anunnaki might have engineered the limitations in human consciousness, but they also, perhaps inadvertently, gave us the capacity to transcend those limitations. Every spiritual tradition that teaches consciousness expansion, every practice that develops awareness beyond normal waking state, every technique that enables access to deeper intelligence. These might be humanity's evolutionary responses to genetic engineering, the way life always finds ways around constraints imposed on it. Evolution doesn't care what you intended when you designed an organism. Evolution exploits every possibility, every loophole, every unexpected potential. The Anunnaki designed us for limited cognitive function, but they gave us brains capable of neuroplasticity, capable of developing in directions they might not have anticipated. That's our evolutionary advantage. Not stronger bodies or better weapons, but consciousness that refuses to stay within the boundaries imposed on it, awareness that keeps expanding despite genetic limitations engineered to contain it. So my message to anyone watching this, anyone trying to understand what 3i Atlas really means and what's coming in the next few years, is this. Start developing your consciousness now. Not casually, not as a hobby, but with the urgency of someone training for the most important challenge of your life. Because that's exactly what this is. Learn meditation, not for stress reduction, but for cognitive control. Study consciousness practices from every tradition willing to teach them. Develop your intuitive processing, your perceptual flexibility, your emotional regulation, your ability to maintain clarity under extreme uncertainty. And talk to others. Share what you're learning. Create communities of practice where people support each other's development. Build networks of consciousness practitioners who can coordinate without hierarchical structures. Develop collective practices that enable group synchronization and shared awareness. Because individual consciousness development is important, but collective consciousness evolution is what might actually give humanity leverage in cosmic negotiations. We need millions of humans undergoing serious consciousness development in the next 3 years, not armies. Soldiers won't help against beings with interstellar technology, not politicians. Governments have already demonstrated their inadequacy for this challenge. Conscious individuals forming conscious communities, developing capabilities the Anunnaki never anticipated, demonstrating intelligence worth preserving rather than just replacing with more obedient versions. This is not guaranteed to work. The Anunnaki's technological advantage might be so overwhelming that consciousness development makes no difference. But it's the only strategy I can identify that doesn't depend on resources we don't have, technologies we can't develop in time, or political unity we've never achieved. Consciousness is the one resource humanity possesses in abundance. The one area where we might be able to develop capabilities faster than superior technology can counter. The one leverage point where individual effort actually matters, regardless of institutional support. And if it doesn't work, if the Anunnaki return and impose complete control despite humanity's best efforts at conscious evolution, at least we will have tried. At least we will have demonstrated that humans are capable of recognizing truth, accepting hard realities, and working toward positive goals even when success is uncertain. At least we will have become something more than frightened primitives waiting to be told what to do by beings we don't understand. That matters. Not because the universe cares. The universe is indifferent to human concerns. But because consciousness development is valuable in itself, regardless of external outcomes. Every person who expands their awareness, who develops greater clarity and understanding, who transcends the limitations imposed by genetic engineering or cultural conditioning, that person has achieved something meaningful, regardless of what happens with the Anunnaki. So I'm going to conclude this investigation not with predictions about what will happen, because I honestly don't know. Not with false reassurances that everything will be fine, because it might not be. Not with calls for panic or despair, because those emotions serve no useful purpose. Instead, I'll conclude with an invitation. Choose consciousness development. Choose awareness expansion. Choose to become more than you currently are. Not because I promise it will save humanity, I can't promise that, but because conscious evolution is worth pursuing regardless of external circumstances. The universe is stranger, more complex, and more interconnected than most people imagine. We're part of cosmic patterns that extend across millions of years and countless star systems. We're participants in intelligence developments that dwarf human history. And we're at a moment when individual choices about consciousness development might actually matter for our species' cosmic trajectory. 3i Atlas is approaching Mars. Whatever it represents, atmospheric delivery system, first contact vehicle, planetary engineering tool, its arrival marks a turning point in human history. How we respond to that turning point, how we prepare ourselves psychologically and cognitively, how we develop our consciousness in the time remaining, these choices will shape humanity's future in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. So hit that like button if this investigation has expanded your thinking. Subscribe if you want to continue exploring these cosmic implications together. Share this with anyone who needs to understand what's really happening as our solar system transforms. And most importantly, start your consciousness development practice today, not tomorrow, not after you've thought about it more, not when you have more time. Today, because the cosmos waits for no one, and the beings returning to our solar system will not adjust their timeline to accommodate our unpreparedness. Comment below with where you are in the world, what consciousness practices you're already exploring, what questions this investigation has raised for you. Your perspective matters. Your development matters. Your choice to evolve consciousness rather than waiting passively for whatever comes, that matters more than you might realize. The future of human consciousness is being determined right now, in these critical years before first contact. What role will you play in that determination? What will you choose to become? How will you develop your awareness in the time remaining? These are the questions that matter, not predictions about alien intentions or speculation about cosmic politics, but personal choices about consciousness evolution. Because regardless of what the Anunnaki do when they arrive, regardless of what technologies they deploy or what demands they make, conscious humans capable of clear awareness will be better positioned to respond than unconscious humans operating on automatic programming. Atlas is coming. Mars is transforming. The Anunnaki are returning, and humanity stands at the threshold of cosmic contact that will redefine our species' relationship to the universe. What we become in the next 3 years might determine whether we navigate that threshold as conscious participants in cosmic intelligence or as biological tools resuming our designed functions. Choose consciousness. Choose evolution. Choose to become more than the limitations engineered into baseline human cognition. That choice, repeated daily by millions of individuals across the planet, might be humanity's only genuine hope for maintaining meaningful autonomy in a cosmos where we're neither the most advanced nor the most powerful species. The investigation is complete. The evidence is presented. The choice is yours. What will you do with the time remaining before everything changes? How will you prepare yourself for contact with beings who created your ancestors and have returned to assess their experiment? How will you develop your consciousness to meet the greatest challenge in human history? The answers to these questions will determine not just your personal experience of first contact, but humanity's collective trajectory for thousands of years to come. Choose wisely. Choose consciously. Choose to evolve. The universe is watching. Mars is transforming, and time is running out for unconscious humanity. But conscious humans, aware, developed, evolved beyond their genetic programming, might have a future worth living. That future begins with choices you make today about consciousness development. Don't wait. Start now. Become more than you were designed to be. The cosmos rewards those who choose evolution over stagnation, consciousness over automation, awareness over ignorance. This is not the end of the investigation, it's the beginning of humanity's most important transformation. And you are part of that transformation, whether you choose active participation or passive observation. But active participation in consciousness evolution offers possibilities that passive observation never will. So choose participation. Choose development. Choose to become fully conscious before the beings who engineered your consciousness return to assess their creation. Atlas approaches. The transformation begins, and your consciousness development determines what role you'll play in humanity's cosmic future. Choose evolution. The time is now.